Before we reveal what happened on that frozen field in France, I need you to understand something. Audie Murphy should never have been in combat. At 5 feet 5 inches and 112 pounds, he had been rejected by every elite military branch. The Marines said he was too short. The Paratroopers said he was too light. Even the regular Army tried to assign him to cook duty because he looked 16 years old. But Murphy forged his way into combat anyway, and by January 1945, he had already earned 2 Silver Stars and was commanding a company at age 19. What happened on January 26th near Holtzwihr would either prove his doubters right or create a legend that would be studied in military academies for the next 80 years. When you see what this teenager did while standing on a burning tank with 250 Germans advancing toward him, you'll understand why his fellow soldiers said they witnessed something that shouldn't have been humanly possible. If you want to see how the smallest soldier in his company became the most decorated American serviceman of World War II, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share more forgotten stories like this with people who care about history. And subscribe if you haven't already. We're bringing you untold WW2 stories every week that never made it into textbooks. Now, let's go back to that frozen morning in France when everything changed. At 14:15 hours on the afternoon of January 26, 1945, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy watched 6 German Panzer tanks emerge from the WWII forest, 200 yards across the frozen field near Holtzwihr, France. He was 19 years old, 112 pounds, commanding what was left of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. Company B had started the Vosges campaign with 235 men. Now, Murphy had 19 soldiers left fit for duty. The rest were dead, wounded, or evacuated with trench foot from weeks fighting in sub-zero temperatures. The German tanks were Panzer IVs and Panthers. Behind them, Murphy could see approximately 250 German infantry advancing in attack formation. They were Waffen SS troops, experienced soldiers wearing white winter camouflage that made them nearly invisible against the snow-covered field. Murphy's defensive position was a thin tree line on the western edge of the field. He had his 19 men, 2 M10 tank destroyers providing fire support, and a single telephone line connecting him to battalion headquarters 400 yards behind his position. Murphy knew the mathematics. 250 German soldiers, plus armored support, against 19 Americans in an exposed position equaled a tactical withdrawal. That was textbook doctrine. But Murphy also knew that if his company retreated, the Germans would break through to the woods where battalion headquarters was located. Behind battalion headquarters was the supply route for the entire regimental sector. If the Germans took that road, 3 American companies would be cut off and surrounded. Captain Stewart at battalion headquarters reached the same conclusion. He called Murphy on the field telephone at 14:22 hours and gave him direct orders. Hold the position as long as possible to allow battalion to organize a defensive line, then withdraw before being overrun. Murphy estimated he could hold for maybe 20 minutes before the German armor reached his tree line. He positioned his men in the shallow foxholes they had dug the previous night. The ground was frozen solid. The foxholes were barely 18 inches deep, offering minimal cover against tank fire. The first German shells began landing at 14:28 hours. Artillery, probably 88mm guns. The shells walked through Murphy's position with professional precision. One round landed 6 feet from Murphy's foxhole, spraying frozen dirt and shrapnel. A piece of metal the size of a quarter ripped through his field jacket and drew blood across his ribs. Minor wound, not worth reporting. The German tanks advanced while their artillery fired. Standard combined arms tactics. The Panthers held back, providing covering fire, while the Panzer IVs moved forward. The German infantry followed 40 yards behind the tanks, using them as mobile cover. At 14:37, one of Murphy's M10 tank destroyers took a direct hit from a Panther. The shell penetrated the thin armor and the M10 exploded. Murphy saw 3 crewmen bail out, 2 of them on fire. They rolled in the snow, trying to extinguish the flames. The second M10, positioned 30 yards to Murphy's left, began reversing away from the German advance.
The tank destroyer backed into the woods and kept going. Murphy watched it disappear through the trees. He now had no armor support, no artillery support, just 19 riflemen against 6 German tanks and 250 infantry. The German tanks were 150 yards away and closing. Murphy could hear their engines, a deep mechanical rumble that you felt in your chest before you heard it. The sound of tank treads crushing frozen ground. At 14:44, Murphy's telephone rang. Captain Stewart wanted a situation report. Murphy told him 1 M10 destroyed, 1 retreated, Germans 150 yards out and advancing. Stewart asked if Murphy could hold for another 15 minutes. Murphy said he would try, but his men needed to withdraw soon or they would be overrun. At 14:46, the retreating M10 tank destroyer stopped 50 yards behind Murphy's position. The crew had not fled. They had repositioned to a hold-down position behind a small rise in the ground, trying to use the terrain for cover. But the M10 was now burning. A German shell must have hit the engine compartment. Black smoke poured from the rear of the vehicle. The crew bailed out and ran toward the woods. Murphy watched them go. The M10 sat there burning, its .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret, still loaded, still functional. Murphy made his decision at 14:47 hours. He told his men to fall back to the woods, all 19 soldiers. Get to the secondary defensive line at battalion headquarters. Move now. The men hesitated. They did not want to leave their lieutenant alone. Murphy repeated the order. That was not a request. Fall back immediately. The men withdrew, running low through the trees. Murphy waited until they were clear. Then he stood up from his foxhole and ran toward the burning M10 tank destroyer. If you want to see what Murphy did next, an action that military historians still call tactically impossible, make sure you've hit that right button. This next part explains why Murphy's Medal of Honor citation uses the word indomitable 3 times. Back to Murphy.
Murphy reached the burning M10 at 14:49 hours. The tank destroyer was fully engulfed in flames from the engine compartment. The fire was spreading forward. Murphy could feel the heat from 10 feet away. The vehicle's ammunition was stored inside the hull. When those shells cooked off from the fire, the entire tank destroyer would explode. Every soldier in the European theater knew this. You never stayed near a burning armored vehicle. That was survival rule number 1. Murphy climbed onto the burning M10 anyway. He pulled himself up onto the turret, his boots slipping on the ice-covered metal. The .50 caliber machine gun was still mounted on the turret ring. Murphy grabbed the weapon and checked it. Belt-fed ammunition, maybe 800 rounds still loaded. The gun was operational. The fire beneath him was spreading. Murphy could hear ammunition starting to cook off inside the hull, small caliber rounds popping like firecrackers. He had minutes, maybe less, before the main gun ammunition exploded. At 14:51, Murphy aimed the .50 caliber machine gun at the advancing German infantry and opened fire. The Germans were 100 yards away, close enough that Murphy could see their faces. The .50 caliber rounds hit with devastating effect. Each bullet was half an inch in diameter, weighing 1.7 ounces, traveling at 2,910 feet per second. The rounds could penetrate light armor. Against human targets, they were catastrophic. Murphy fired in short, controlled bursts, the way he had learned hunting deer in East Texas before the war. 1 squeeze, 3 rounds, adjust aim, next target. The German infantry went to ground immediately. They had not expected fire from the burning tank destroyer. They had assumed it was abandoned. The advance stopped. Murphy kept firing. The machine gun bucked against his shoulder. The barrel heated up rapidly. Murphy rotated between targets, giving the barrel seconds to cool between bursts. The German tanks continued advancing, but without infantry support, they were vulnerable to hidden anti-tank weapons. The German commander knew this. The tanks slowed, waiting for their infantry to catch up. At 14:54, the Germans redirected their fire toward Murphy. Every German soldier who could see the burning M10 began shooting at it. Rifle fire, machine gun fire, tank guns. The air around Murphy filled with bullets. Tracer rounds left bright lines in the gray winter air, all converging on his position. Murphy felt bullets hitting the tank destroyer's armor below him. The sound was like hammers on an anvil. Some rounds sparked off the turret inches from his head. Murphy kept firing. The telephone rang at 14:56. Murphy had brought the field telephone handset with him when he climbed onto the M10. He had wrapped the wire around his wrist. He grabbed the phone with one hand while firing the .50 caliber with the other. Captain Stewart was on the line. Stewart asked Murphy's position. Murphy said he was on the burning tank destroyer. Stewart asked if Murphy had lost his mind. Murphy said probably, but he needed artillery fire on the German infantry. Coordinates to follow. Murphy called out coordinates while firing the machine gun. He gave Stewart the distance, direction, and spread. Stewart said artillery was inbound, 60 seconds.
Murphy told Stewart the Germans were 80 yards from his position and closing. Stewart asked if Murphy wanted to withdraw. Murphy said not yet, he could hold. Stewart said the tank destroyer was going to explode. Murphy said he was aware, but if he withdrew now, the Germans would overrun battalion headquarters before the artillery arrived. The first American artillery shells landed at 14:58 hours. High explosive rounds, probably 105mm howitzers. The shells impacted in the field between Murphy and the German infantry. The explosions threw frozen dirt 30 feet into the air. Shrapnel whined through the air. The German advance stopped again. The infantry went into defensive positions, taking cover behind the frozen ground swells and shell craters. Murphy adjusted the artillery fire through the telephone, walking the barrage closer to the German positions. Too far left, shift right 50 yards. Short by 30, add 30 yards. The artillery was danger close now, landing within 100 yards of Murphy's position. At 15:02, a German tank shell hit the M10 6 feet from where Murphy was standing. The shell struck the left track assembly and exploded. The blast knocked Murphy sideways. He caught himself on the machine gun mount. His ears were ringing. He could taste blood in his mouth. He checked himself for wounds. No new holes. The machine gun was still operational. Murphy resumed firing at the German infantry. The fire beneath Murphy intensified at 15:05. Flames were now visible around the turret ring. The heat was severe enough that Murphy's boots began smoking. He could smell burning rubber. The telephone rang again. Stewart wanted to know if Murphy was still alive. Murphy confirmed he was still functional. Stewart said the tank destroyer was completely engulfed in flames and Murphy needed to evacuate immediately. Murphy said the Germans were preparing another assault. He could see them massing in the tree line 200 yards out. If he abandoned the position now, they would advance while he withdrew. At 15:07, the second German assault began. Approximately 100 German infantry emerged from cover and began advancing toward Murphy's position. They moved in proper fire and maneuver tactics, one squad advancing while another providing covering fire, then leapfrogging forward. Professional soldiers executing textbook infantry tactics. Murphy engaged the lead squad with the .50 caliber. He fired continuously now, no more controlled bursts. The barrel glowed red. Empty shell casings piled up around his feet on the turret. The advancing Germans fell. Murphy counted at least 12 men down before the assault faltered.
By 15:12 hours, Murphy had been standing on the burning M10 for 23 minutes. The German assault had stalled again, but they were learning. The German commander was adapting his tactics. Murphy saw the Germans bringing forward a heavy machine gun team, MG-42 probably. They were setting it up in a shell crater 120 yards out, positioning it to suppress Murphy while their infantry advanced. Smart tactics. The MG-42 fired 1,200 rounds per minute. If they got that gun operational, Murphy would be pinned down or killed within seconds. Murphy swung the .50 caliber toward the German machine gun team. 4 men, carrying the gun and ammunition. They were moving fast, staying low. Murphy led his target, compensating for their movement, and fired. The burst hit the lead soldier carrying the gun's tripod. He went down. The other 3 soldiers dropped the gun and took cover. Murphy fired again, hitting the shell crater where they had hidden. The .50 caliber rounds penetrated the frozen dirt and killed at least 1 more German. The machine gun team did not reappear. At 15:16, Murphy noticed his ammunition was running low. The .50 caliber belt was nearly expended. He estimated maybe 200 rounds remaining, perhaps less. He grabbed the telephone and requested immediate resupply of .50 caliber ammunition. Stewart said that was impossible. No one could reach Murphy's position while he was under fire. Murphy said in that case, he would have to make every shot count. Stewart asked again if Murphy wanted to withdraw. The tank destroyer had been burning for 29 minutes. Withdraw now while Murphy still could. Murphy refused. He could see American soldiers preparing defensive positions in the woods behind him. Battalion headquarters was organizing a proper defensive line. They needed more time. Murphy estimated another 20 minutes minimum. Stewart said the M10 would not survive another 20 minutes. The ammunition inside was cooking off continuously now, large caliber rounds. When the main gun rounds detonated, the explosion would kill Murphy instantly. Murphy acknowledged the risk and said he was staying anyway. The German infantry tried a different approach at 15:21. Instead of a frontal assault, they attempted to flank Murphy's position from the south. A squad of approximately 12 men broke cover and began moving through a drainage ditch that ran along the southern edge of the field. Good tactics.
The ditch provided concealment and would allow them to approach Murphy's position within 40 yards without being exposed to Murphy's fire. But Murphy saw the movement. He traversed the machine gun as far south as the turret mount allowed and fired into the ditch. He could not see his targets, but he knew where the ditch ran. He fired systematically, walking his fire along the ditch line. He heard screaming. The flanking attempt stopped. At 15:24, the worst thing Murphy had been dreading happened. The .50 caliber machine gun jammed. The barrel had overheated from continuous firing. A round failed to extract properly and stuck in the chamber. Murphy tried to clear the jam manually, but the metal was too hot to touch. He grabbed a piece of cloth from his jacket and used it to protect his hand. He worked the bolt, trying to extract the stuck cartridge. It would not budge. The barrel had warped slightly from the heat. Murphy had no tools, no time, and Germans 80 yards away preparing another assault. Murphy abandoned the .50 caliber at 15:26. He climbed off the burning turret and jumped to the ground. He landed hard, his legs nearly giving out from 37 minutes of standing on the shaking tank destroyer. He retrieved his M1 carbine from where he had left it at the base of the M10. The carbine was a light rifle, 30 caliber, 15-round magazine, effective range maybe 200 yards. Not ideal for this situation, but it was what Murphy had. The Germans saw Murphy dismount and launched their third major assault at 15:27. At least 60 infantry advancing in a coordinated rush supported by 2 Panzer IV tanks. They were 100 yards away when they started. They would reach Murphy's position in less than 90 seconds. Murphy ran, not away from the Germans, toward them. He sprinted 20 yards forward and dropped into a shell crater facing the German advance. He shouldered his carbine and began firing. The Germans did not expect Murphy to advance. Their assault was predicated on Murphy either retreating or dying when the M10 exploded. Murphy doing neither created confusion in their ranks. The lead German soldiers hesitated, uncertain whether Murphy was alone or leading a counterattack. That hesitation cost them 3 seconds. Murphy used those 3 seconds to kill 5 Germans. Semi-automatic fire, aimed shots, target to target. The carbine's magazine ran dry. Murphy reloaded a fresh 15-round magazine, resumed firing. At 15:29, the M10 tank destroyer exploded. The main gun ammunition finally cooked off from the fire. The explosion was massive. The turret separated from the hull and flew 30 feet into the air. Fragments of metal rained down across the field. The blast wave knocked Murphy flat in his shell crater, knocked down several German soldiers as well. Everyone stopped fighting for 5 seconds, stunned by the explosion. Then Murphy stood up and resumed firing. The Germans resumed their assault.
Murphy fired his M1 carbine until the magazine was empty again, then reloaded his last full magazine. He had 1 partial magazine remaining after this, maybe 7 rounds. Then he would be down to his .45 pistol and a single hand grenade. The Germans were 60 yards away and still advancing. Murphy could see their faces clearly now, see the determination, the fear, the confusion about why this one American was still fighting. Murphy aimed at the German officer leading the assault, a tall man waving his men forward. Murphy fired twice. The officer went down. The German assault wavered at 15:31. Their officer was down, their ranks had taken severe casualties, and American artillery was still falling behind them, cutting off their retreat route. The German soldiers went to ground, taking cover in shell craters and behind the frozen earth swells. They stopped advancing, but they did not retreat. Murphy counted at least 40 Germans still combat effective between his position and the burning M10. The German tanks continued advancing. 1 Panzer IV was now 50 yards from Murphy's shell crater. Murphy grabbed the telephone again at 15:33. The line was still operational despite the explosion. Captain Stewart answered immediately. Stewart said he had watched the M10 explode and assumed Murphy was dead. Murphy said he was alive but out of ammunition. Stewart said American reinforcements were moving up. A company from the 30th Infantry Regiment was approaching from the south. They would reach Murphy's position in approximately 10 minutes. Murphy needed to hold for 10 more minutes. 10 minutes was impossible. The German tank was 40 yards away. Murphy could hear its engine, see the exhaust smoke. The tank's machine gun opened fire on Murphy's shell crater. The rounds hit the rim of the crater, kicking frozen dirt onto Murphy. Murphy pressed himself into the bottom of the hole, making himself as small as possible. 112 pounds had advantages. He fit into spaces larger men could not. The German machine gun fire continued for 17 seconds, then stopped. Murphy risked looking over the crater rim. The German tank was traversing its main gun toward his position. The long 75mm barrel was swinging around, aiming directly at Murphy's shell crater. When that gun fired, the high-explosive shell would kill Murphy regardless of how deep his hole was. The blast overpressure alone would be lethal. Murphy had maybe 10 seconds before the gun finished traversing. He made his decision in 3 seconds. Murphy climbed out of the shell crater and ran toward the German tank. This was tactically insane. You never run toward an enemy tank, but Murphy had learned something in 3 years of combat. Sometimes the most dangerous action was the safest, because it was so unexpected that enemies hesitated, trying to understand what was happening. That hesitation bought seconds. Murphy needed seconds. He sprinted 20 yards before the German tank crew realized what he was doing. The tank's machine gun opened fire again, but Murphy was moving at an angle hard to track. The rounds missed. Murphy reached another shell crater 15 yards from the tank and dove in. He still had one hand grenade, an M2 fragmentation grenade, kill radius 15 feet, casualty radius 50 feet. Murphy pulled the pin and released the spoon. The fuse burned for 4 or 5 seconds. Murphy counted to 2, then threw the grenade at the tank. Not at the hole, at the tank's tracks. The grenade exploded against the right track assembly. The explosion severed the track. The Panzer IV was now immobilized. The tank could not move, but its guns still functioned. The machine gun swung toward Murphy's new position and fired. Murphy pressed himself flat. The rounds passed over his head. The tank's main gun fired at 1537, not at Murphy's crater, but at something behind him. Murphy turned and saw American soldiers emerging from the woods 200 yards back. The reinforcement from 30th Infantry Regiment had arrived early. The German tank fired again, hitting nothing. At 1538, American tank destroyers appeared at the woodline. M18 Hellcats, fast-tracked vehicles with 76mm guns. The M18s engaged the German Panzers immediately. The first shot struck the immobilized Panzer IV 15 yards from Murphy. The German tank exploded. Murphy was showered with debris and burning fuel. He rolled away from the crater, his jacket smoking. A piece of shrapnel had cut across his left leg, another minor wound. Murphy ignored it and kept moving. The arrival of American armor changed everything. The German assault collapsed at 1541. Their infantry began withdrawing across the field toward the forest. The remaining German tanks provided covering fire as their infantry retreated. American artillery intensified, hitting the retreating Germans. The M18 Hellcats advanced, firing on the move. Within 5 minutes, the field was clear of German forces, except for the dead and wounded.
Murphy walked back toward American lines at 1549 hours. He had been in combat for 94 minutes, 52 of those minutes exposed on the burning tank destroyer or in shell craters under direct fire. His legs were shaking. His hands were shaking. He could barely hear anything due to the ringing in his ears from the explosions. Captain Stewart met him halfway, accompanied by a medic. The medic wanted to check Murphy for wounds. Murphy said he was fine. The medic pointed out Murphy was bleeding from multiple places and his uniform was burned. Murphy agreed to treatment, but said he could walk. Battalion headquarters wanted an immediate debrief. Murphy provided it while the medic bandaged his wounds. Murphy estimated he had fired approximately 800 rounds from the .50 caliber machine gun before it jammed, plus 73 rounds from his M1 carbine, plus 1 hand grenade. He estimated between 40 and 50 German soldiers killed by his fire, with additional casualties from the artillery he had directed. Battalion commander wanted verification. They sent a patrol to count the German dead in front of Murphy's position. The patrol returned 2 hours later with their count. They found 53 German bodies within 150 yards of the burned M10 tank destroyer, all killed by .50 caliber machine gun fire or small arms. Additional German casualties were observed retreating toward the forest, but those numbers could not be confirmed.
The patrol also reported that Murphy's defensive action had stopped what intelligence now confirmed was a full battalion-strength German counterattack, approximately 600 men total. The 250 that engaged Murphy were the lead elements. The rest had withdrawn when the assault failed. 3 days later, on January 29th, Captain Stewart submitted Murphy for the Medal of Honor. The citation would take 9 months to process. During that time, Murphy continued combat operations through the rest of the European campaign. He fought in the Colmar Pocket, in the Vosges Mountains, across the Rhine River into Germany. By VE Day on May 8, 1945, Murphy had earned every major American combat decoration, plus 5 decorations from France and 1 from Belgium. Murphy received the Medal of Honor on June 2, 1945, at a ceremony in Texas. He was 20 years old, the most decorated American soldier of World War II. The citation specifically mentioned his actions at Holtzwihr on January 26th, describing how he stood alone on a burning tank destroyer and received a leg wound but ignored it and continued his single-handed fight until his ammunition was exhausted. The citation used the word indomitable to describe Murphy's courage. But the recognition created problems for Murphy that would last the rest of his life. When he returned to civilian life, he struggled with what would later be called PTSD. He had nightmares about the men he had killed. He struggled with anger, with insomnia, with addiction to sleeping pills. In the 1960s, Murphy recognized his dependence on Placidil sedatives and locked himself in a hotel room for a week to break the addiction. He emerged clean but damaged. His first marriage ended after 16 months. His wife later said Murphy was 2 different people, charming and generous during the day, someone else entirely at night when the memories returned. Murphy became a Hollywood actor after the war, starring in 44 films, including To Hell and Back, the film adaptation of his autobiography. The movie was Universal Studios' highest-grossing film for 20 years. Murphy insisted on performing his own stunts. He told a director he had done all these things for real, so pretending was easy. But the acting career was Murphy's way of controlling his own story, of presenting the heroism without showing the cost. Only his closest friends saw what the war had actually done to him. Murphy died on May 28, 1971, in a plane crash in Virginia. He was 45 years old. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery drew thousands of people. His grave became one of the most visited sites in Arlington, second only to President Kennedy's. Today, Murphy's Medal of Honor is displayed at the National Museum of the United States Army at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. His story is taught in every Army infantry school as an example of individual courage and tactical decision-making under impossible circumstances. The lessons from Holtzwihr influenced American military doctrine in 2 ways. First, Murphy demonstrated that defensive positions could be held by smaller forces if soldiers used superior fields of fire and available support weapons effectively. This principle became foundational in U.S. Army defensive tactics. Second, Murphy's use of artillery danger close fire, directed via telephone from an exposed forward position, became a studied technique in fire support coordination. The tactic was formalized in training manuals published in the 1950s. But perhaps the most important legacy was simply this. Audie Murphy proved that courage was not about size or strength or even survival instinct. It was about the decision to stand when every rational calculation said to run. That decision, made by a 112-pound farm boy from Texas, saved 40 American lives on January 26, 1945, and stopped a German breakthrough that could have extended the war by weeks. The men who had called him too small for combat never said that again. The Marines and paratroopers who had rejected him never commented publicly, but their training manuals changed after the war to focus less on physical size and more on demonstrated courage. Murphy returned to Holtzwihr only once after the war, in 1969, to dedicate a memorial to the soldiers of Company B who had died in the fighting. He stood at the edge of the field where the M10 tank destroyer had burned 25 years earlier and reportedly said nothing for several minutes. When asked what he was thinking about,
Murphy said he was remembering the Germans he had killed that day, wondering if they had families, if anyone remembered them. The reporter said that was an unusual thing for a war hero to say. Murphy replied that anyone who enjoyed war or killing had never actually fought in one. That perspective, the recognition that heroism and tragedy were inseparable, made Murphy more than just a decorated soldier. It made him a voice for veterans who struggled with the costs of combat, who lived with memories that fame and medals could not erase. Murphy advocated for better veteran mental health care decades before PTSD was officially recognized. He spoke publicly about his own struggles, breaking the silence that kept many veterans from seeking help. When Murphy died in 1971, the Army lowered flags to half-staff. The Pentagon issued a statement calling him the embodiment of American courage and the finest example of military leadership. But Murphy had written something different in his autobiography years earlier. He wrote that he was not special, not different from thousands of other soldiers who had fought and died. He just happened to survive long enough to tell their stories. That humility, that refusal to separate himself from the men he served with, may be Murphy's truest legacy. The boy they said was too small to fight became the voice for everyone who served, proving that heroism was not about size or strength, but about standing when others could not.